Hi everyone, just a quick update before I get into this video. I've recently started teaching on Skillshare and have put together a beginner's pen and wash class just in time for October/Inktober. Go ahead and check it out, the details are in the description below. So I'm going to start with something very simple and straightforward. So not too much details with the sketch. These two landscapes here that I've just drawn in with my pen earlier, and we'll go with the top one first. So as you can see, I've drawn the horizon line. I've got a bit of land here, a bit of the headland and some of the beach here and a couple of figures. So first thing I'm going to do, and what I like to also do, is just try to put this paper, or the bit of paper that you're working on a slight slant. And what this does is it's just going to help the paint to flow downwards so that it doesn't pull. So I'm going to go in with a blue, and I've got a few to choose from here, and I'm just going to pick up this one here, which is cobalt blue, and I'm just mixing up enough on the palette, and I'm starting off just a little bit thicker on top, just carrying this wash down the page, and I'm using a flat brush, and just really, as you're going down the page, add more water to this mix, and it's just going to make this nice little gradient here. Okay, and carry that all the way, cut around these bits of rock and tree, headland. So at this point, what you can do, you can go in and try to, blend it a little bit more, but it doesn't really matter. And in fact, a bit of irregularities and funny edges here and there gives the painting a bit of character. And another thing you can do, you can mix up a bit of grey, and I've got some left over in my palette. I've always got a lot left over in my palette because I just never clean it, and just dry that off a bit, but pick up some of this grey paint, and you can just add in little clouds here and there, just slightly darker clouds, but I don't want to make it too obvious. Okay, and I'm just trying to lift out a bit of paint on top here, so with using that brush, a bit of water, and just lifting up and drying it a bit. Okay, so coming down into the beach area, I'm just going to go with the water again, just with this blue, and hopefully this line hasn't completely dried yet. No, it's okay. And I'm just going to do this, go into the beach area a bit, leave a little bit of white as well on the paper, just to indicate some of the waves and the froth that's coming off to the shore. And what I'll do is I'm going to pick up some yellow ochre now and blend, and make sure that the paint is still a little bit wet, so you can touch onto the water just a little bit. Doesn't matter if it blends together. And as you go down towards the foreground, just darken that wash a bit more. So I'm just adding a bit more yellow ochre to that mix, maybe just lighten it a little bit, adding some lemon yellow into that mix. And I've also got some burnt sienna, just to darken it up a little bit near the front, like so. Okay, now what we can do is we can do some of this headland. Now I'm going to actually go in with the cooler colour. Actually, I might start off with just greying it down. Now I'm going to use a smaller flat brush here and just test it out, see if that's too dark. It looks around we want, and I'm just going to paint that in. And it's always good to add in some colours while that wash is still wet. Just cutting around. Being careful enough, but not trying to be too exact here. Okay, and that's the headland done. Where it gets closer to the horizon line, you can darken it up a little bit. So just grabbing some darker blue that's left on the palette, some greyish blue, and I'm just really just feathering that on the bottom there, letting it melt in. Okay, and now what we can do is just add a little bit of colour to these figures, and I'm going to go with some red and just water that down a bit so that it goes to a very light red, and just go over this figure here. He's sitting on the beach, and this figure here, I'm going to go in just with the darker colour. Yep, that looks alright. That's a bluish grey, and you can even add in some of that red now to their head. It's not a big deal. And finish that off with just some indication of some shadows on the ground here. So the sun's coming directly above there. Okay. I'm just gonna soften this edge a bit. So all I'm doing is just wetting the brush and just touching on the areas where it looks a little bit too harsh. Okay, I reckon it needs a bit of green here and there. And last step, we're just going to add in just a bit more detail in the ocean that's coming in. So just some waves, indicate some waves, and the brush strokes I'm using are quite quick, and they are dry brush strokes, so you can see how the texture of the paper is coming through a little bit, like that. Okay. And just make it a little bit darker in some areas where it hits the shore, like that. Finishing touch. Now I'm just gonna give him some hair. That's a bit much. Something like that. And do some birds in the sky, which is now dried. So just little V's and dots coming up on the horizon line like that. Just helps to add a bit more interest to the sky. And again, I'm using some greyish colour here. It's looking quite alright, and some darker areas on here as well, just to indicate, just dry brushing little bits and pieces near the shoreline, just to indicate some seaweed and things that might have washed up, and near the foreground too, just some variations. So that's a very simple beach pen and wash. Okay, so I'm going to get started now on this second one here, and really it's quite simple and similar to the first one, except it's more zoomed in, the figure's closer, there's some tire tracks running through the sand, you've got the water coming in here and the beach. So let's give it a shot. I'm going to start first with the sky, so just test that out. There we go. So that's I'm going to try add in a bit of ultramarine actually. So that's an ultramarine blue, but I did start out with some cobalt blue. And just trying to make that you know, a bit stronger on top. Mix more water into this blue now, and as I come downwards, I'm just going to make that lighter. And remember, it's always going to dry lighter, so you're going to need to paint a bit darker than you're anticipating. Okay. And what I'll do is I'm going to carry that down a little bit more to the foreground, the midground I mean, and the foreground, and just do this water. And I do want to leave some suggestions of waves, so I don't want to colour it all in, so I'm just trying to skip little bits here and there like that. And I also want to lift out some bit of paint here too, where it joins on to this rock. Okay, just keep continuing down. Oh, it's a bit dark. Okay, and again, let's get some yellow ochre. I'm going to actually mix that with some lemon yellow, brighten it up a bit more. Yep. And just leaving some, again, some indications of waves, and I'm doing that by just leaving bits of white on the paper. And remember, these are just little paintings, they're little sketches, so you're not trying to create a masterpiece here, you're just wanting to have a nice little landscape that you can finish off in, you know, 10-15 minutes or so. So let's just join this all up now, and I'm going to just add in some raw sienna, some burnt sienna in the foreground. Yep. Bits of indicate some bits of seaweed and areas on the beach. Like that. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is this headland, and this needs to be darker than the sky and pretty much everything else. So we're going to go in with a bit of this green. This is Hooker's green. I've also got some sap green here, which is a very bright kind of green, but we need to dull this down a bit. But I'll go in first and then we can add in all the other bits and pieces after. I'm going to try my best to get it to mix on the paper, because when you get the colours mixing on the paper it always looks a lot more interesting than if you try to mix it directly from the palette. So working relatively quickly here, and you know, let's add in some bits of brown. Yep. Go, and then comes down further like that, and some darker areas here. Let's bring that all the way down. Go. Maybe add in a little bit of blue to that mix as well. Some dark areas up the top, just to indicate some of the trees and variations in there. A bit darker here. A shrub there. Now you don't have to follow the reference picture exactly, but I do like to refer to it just to look at where the lights and the darks of the rocks and things like that are. Okay. Another thing you can do is, if you've got a little brush, especially one of these little fan brushes, you can go ahead and pick up some darker paint like this, and just feather it in some of the areas on the top there like that, just to indicate, you know, some of the trees and branches growing out. Okay, you don't need to overdo it, but just a little bit like that adds some character, because otherwise it just looks like this big shape, and just helps to make it a bit more interesting. You know, down the bottom like that. Okay, but let's not overdo it. That's looking okay to me now. Now what we'll do is the figure, so let's get this over with. Let's think, so what colour should I make him? I think I'll go with the cerulean blue. Let's give that a try. Okay. Like that. And we'll do his head. Let's add some red there and get that to blend in to the blue. And with the legs, I'm going to pick up this grey that's left on the palette and just carry that down like this to indicate his legs. I'm going to leave the dog because it's already already looks like one. I don't need to change it up. And some of these tire tracks that are heading across the beach, I'm going to add those just a bit of colour, define them a bit more like this. Okay. Same with this one. They almost serve as directional lines to aid with the perspective. Just see if I can add a bit of detail to this wave. Like that. Okay. And now I'm just trying to add some of these darker waves running through. Give him some hair. And he could be wearing a cap. So let's add in some little birds in the distance. Just add a bit of interest. And we're done. We're going to try something a bit different for this one, and we're going to do a sunset effect. So before we started off just making the sky blue, this is my technique to sort of indicate a bit of a sunset. So we've got, I'm going to go pick up some of this 𝗠𝗘𝗗𝗜𝗔𝗟 yellow, and you've got to do this pretty quickly. Really just get into the bottom here, cut around these rocks and trees quite quickly. As soon as that's done, what you want to do is quickly grab your blue, and I've got some cobalt blue here, and just drop it in. Touch that edge. Just feather that across. What I want to also just do is add in where I can. I'll see if I can get a smaller brush here and just add in little bits of blue like this to where it joins in. Okay, and I'm gonna go through and do this top area now with that same cobalt blue mix. Like that. There you go. So that will mix together, create an interesting little effect there, especially in this transition area. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that this reflection here in the water, it matches the sky. So I'm actually going to go through again with the orange that I've made up on the side here, just with the yellow and red mixed together. If you've got orange, just use that. It doesn't have to be the exact same color. And I'm just going to go and paint through the water now. And it's going to have this, going to look quite warm up on the top here. And as we move down the page, I'm going to cool it down with the cobalt blue, making sure you join it up as well, and cut around that area. I'm just trying to leave some white areas as well. Yeah. Okay. I'll try to get this to mix a bit more around this section. Okay. Now what we're going to do is grab some yellow ochre. If you don't have yellow ochre, you can mix up a brighter yellow with a bit of brown, just to dull it down a little bit, and paint in the foreground. And one thing to remember as well, just indicate these waves by leaving some white on the paper, like that. Okay, and drop in a bit of this orange. I'll just cut around like this. And in some areas you might even just want to encourage it to blend a little bit, like this. Down to the page. There we go. It's a bit too dark up that side, so I'll lighten that up a bit. Lift off. There we go. Now with some of this headland out the back, what I'm actually going to do is go in with sap green. If you don't have sap green, just use mix up a very light coloured green and just paint this whole area in that colour. It's very bright. It's a very, very bright green, and you'll see why I'm doing that in a second. Basically, I should have gone to do it a little bit earlier just to save some time, but we want to make that have an undercoat, a lighter undercoat, before we go through and add in the darker rocks. That won't take too long to dry though. And, oops, there we go. Like that. Okay. Well, that's drying off. I'm going to do this guy with the surfboard using some of this greyish blue that we've got. Just going to go over this surfboard like that, and include his arm in there as well. Okay, and just join his legs on like this. Rest of his body, a little bit of red here of a face. Okay, and we'll let that dry off. Now, little bird sitting by the beach here. Sitting by the water, I'm just gonna colour it in a bit darker, like that. There's already a shadow indicated underneath. And while this water is pretty much dry, greyish colour now, and going through to do them, just like this. Same with this one here as well. Okay, and we can now go through and just add more detail and darkness, especially to these rocks. Like that. Okay, and I'm going to leave some areas of it just with the background wash showing through. Grab a bigger brush. Using a green. Here. Just to be a bit darker. Adding some blue in there as well. Like that. Okay, and we're almost done. Give them a bit of hair, just indicate, and you know the shadow's already there from the pen. We can add that in. Like that. And you can add in some birds as well, like this. It's just little V's, some of the wings connected, some of them not. That's it. The final one, which is the most difficult of the four, only because it just has more elements in it, really we're going to approach it in exactly the same way. So we're going to look at which areas are lighter, which areas are darker. I'm going to go and again start with the sky. And let's make this one a bit warmer. So I'm gonna go in with just a lot more yellow than I would usually on the horizon line, like this. Okay. And carry that upwards a bit like that. and near the top I'm just going to add in a very thin layer of blue. Like this, and encourage that to mix a bit. Has faded a little bit, almost to grey, this top area of the sky. Introducing a bit of extra water into the sky, and this is going to hopefully create some interesting cloud structures and some variations. Some rough looking clouds up in the distance. Okay. And let that do its own thing. Now, just add in a bit more here. I'm going to move down into the headland and pick up that sap green, a little bit of that sap green, and it's too dark. Get a light mix like this, carry that in. If it mixes a little bit with the sky, it doesn't matter, it's almost dry now anyway. Just carry that downwards. Yellow ochre. Just gonna dull that down a bit. And what I'm doing here, I'm just picking up some of this darker colour on the palette. Really is just turning to a greenish blue, and adding it in while the paper is still a little bit damp, like that. Just to try to paint a bit of that headland. On with a bit of yellow ochre to paint these rocks in the distance, and some of the ocean as well, which I'm going to start off with this mix of yellow/orange that we've used for the sky, and carry that down. As we go down, clean off your paintbrush and pick up some blue. I'm going to use cobalt blue again, and just interconnect, join that on with the orange there, and move it towards the shore, and remembering to leave bits of white as well, just indicate some waves. Okay, Now getting down to the mid and the foreground. So what I'm going to do is pick up some of this orange and mix it with yellow ochre just to dull it down a little bit, and try that. Okay. And let's paint this in there. Remembering to leave some of the white of the paper. Cutting around these umbrellas. With the people, it's not such a huge deal. With the figures in the foreground, if you do go over them a bit, because they're under the umbrellas and we're going to make them darker at the end. Anyway, so let's carry this wash down as we get further down. Just darken it a little bit, and I've just added in a little bit of burnt sienna in the foreground here. Join that all up together like this. There we go. With some of these umbrellas now, what I'm going to do is pick up some cerulean blue, and I'm going to indicate some colour here, like that, on that one, so that can be blue umbrella. How about we now go with red umbrella here, and pinkish sort of colour. And the one to the right, I'm gonna go blue again, but more of a cerulean blue, cobalt blue. And it's a bit too dark. So I'm going to have just lift out a bit of paint. There we go. Looking alright. And the last umbrella, how about we go yellow and get in a bit of blue running down the side there, like that. Okay. And going to add in a bit of darkness underneath the umbrella here, just on the bottoms of them. Just with this grey I've got left over on the palette. That. And we'll do these stems as well. There we go. And with the figures, it's up to you what colours you want to make them, but the ones underneath the umbrella, you do want to make them a darker colour, so you can really get this all done in one go, connect them all up like this. Go a bit darker. If you don't get the value, if you don't get the right value at on the first go, you can always go through later. But I try to get it all done on the first go if possible. this little crate here is in the sun, and these two here just indicated two chairs sort of lying there. And with the figures, let's go with a darker one and a lighter one. That. Add in some legs. This. Just carrying a handbag or something like that. Okay. And you're essentially done. Stage, it's all just a matter of whether you want to add a bit more detail or not. And you know, I can go through and pick up some some darker paint here on the palette and just indicate some bushes and darker areas. And it helps if you've got a old brush like the one I'm using, where you can just do this sort of thing and on the palette indicate some little bushes growing and darker areas here and there, but yep. Just forgot to add in a bit of a shadow underneath these two figures. Quickly indicate that. And you know, some little bits and pieces here in the foreground. And of course, let's add in some birds. Oops, quickly. That. And we are done. Let me just darken this bit of this umbrella slightly. Okay.